For those of you who are new to Blue Oaks, my name is Matt Van Cleve, and I'm the teaching pastor here. This is our last week in our series, Different Worlds, and I want to start with this idea that we live in an age of specialists. We want our kids to be healthy, and so we make sure they go to a regular doctor. We expect teachers to develop our kids intellectually. We expect coaches to develop them athletically. We expect trainers to help with their muscle development. We expect music teachers to develop them vocally or musically or culturally. We're into specialists in all the areas of our kids' lives where we want them to be developed, which leads to this question. Who's responsible for making sure my kids develop spiritually? The writers of Scripture talk about this quite directly. Deuteronomy 6 is written by Moses for the people of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These words are the central affirmation of the Old Testament faith. For centuries, this has been called the Shema, from the first word in it, Hear, O Israel. It was recited by every Israelite twice a day. First thing when you got up in the morning and the last thing before you went to bed at night. It marked the beginning of the day and the end of the day. A child was taught these words before they could even talk. So the very first words a child would say, the very first sentence a Jewish child would learn is this. When a martyr went to his death, the very final words that a Jewish martyr would say before dying were these words. It marked the beginning of their life, the end of their life. It marked the beginning of the day, the end of day. This was the core of what it meant to follow God. Now, here's what I would like you to notice that comes directly after these words in Scripture. It's the next thing Moses says to the people. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. In other words, he's saying to all of us adults, I want you to live out this stuff. And then look what he says. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. Moses says, do whatever you have to do. Like tie a string around your finger, put magnets on the refrigerator, use Post-it notes if that's going to help. Include these words in the design of your home if that will help you. Write them on the doorframes of your homes so that every time you come into your house, you're reminded. I need to talk about God with my children. If you were to ask Moses, whose job is it to make sure kids are growing up and hearing about, thinking about, and being preoccupied with God, the answer would be very clear. It's the parents. Talk to your children, he says. And that doesn't change in the New Testament era. The Apostle Paul says the same thing. He says to the church at Ephesus, that parents are to bring up their children in the instruction and training, or sometimes translated, the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And I just want to speak real directly to this because I think in our day, a lot of people have gotten the idea that they can kind of outsource the spiritual development of their kids to the church. Well, this is not according to Scripture. The person who God will hold primarily responsible for the wise spiritual training and instruction and development of your kids is you. Not primarily the church, not primarily their small group leader, not a pastor. If they go to a private religious school, not their teachers there. Now, the church is a very important partner in the spiritual development of kids, but the primary responsibility belongs to moms and dads. Now, this will take time, effort, work, prayer, sweat, learning, and sometimes awkward, embarrassing conversations that require growth. And a lot of times, the frank truth is people just don't want to do it. And this leads me to a few questions about parenting and children that almost never get asked in our culture, but I think they deserve some serious thought. And I want to address them real briefly right now. The questions are around why have kids in the first place? Like, who should have kids? And how many kids should you have? And in the ancient times, people often had kids for financial reasons. There was no Social Security in previous centuries. There was no Medicare. kids were kind of like your 401k. And that has changed to a significant degree. Parents, are kids today more of a financial asset or a liability? A liability, big time, right? All too often in our culture, most people don't even think about these questions. It's just assumed that having kids is a normal thing to do. And what has been lost is the biblical notion that being a parent is not an expectation. It's not an obligation. It's not a right. It's a calling. It's a vocation. The idea of a calling or a vocation in the Bible is something that is a life direction. It's a road of serving that I follow, not because I happen to want to or because someone expects me to, but because I'm responding to what I believe is God's mandate on my life. The New Testament writers are quite clear about this. God calls some people to be married, and God calls some people to be single. The Apostle Paul very clearly affirms this is a calling, and the same is true as a parent. No one should become a parent automatically or just because they got married and it's like the next thing to do after you get married. Sometimes God may call you to a form of work or a form of ministry or a lifestyle that is not compatible with raising children. Or maybe your temperament is such that parenting would not be a good fit for you. I just want to take this moment to encourage you on this. If you do not have kids yet, don't be pressured by the media. Don't be pressured by cultural expectations. Don't be pressured by gray-haired people who say it's your job to provide them a little bundle of joy that they can spoil and cuddle. I mean, if they're that desperate to spoil and cuddle a little bundle, buy them a chihuahua or something. Be real mindful about this. Make it a matter of very mature, deliberate reflection and a matter of prayer. And if you decide to have children, give serious thought and prayer to how many. Sometimes people choose the size of their family for the goofiest reasons. Well, she had 9 kids in her family when she was growing up, and I had 5 kids, and so we've decided just to kind of split the difference and have 7. And they're both working full-time, and they're not home with their kids. It's just not wise. Parenting is a vocation that ought to be entered into through a real serious process of prayer and discussion and decision-making and commitment. Now, I know right now some of you are thinking to yourself, well, we never thought about this, and we have kids, so what do we do? There's a word in the Bible for you. Bummer. No, you can real safely assume that if you have children, God is calling you to be the best parents, to be the best shaper of those little lives that you can be. So if you do have kids, how do you help build faith in your kids? It's a real striking thing, and I don't know how we attach the right kind of weight to this. Everything else that we've talked about in this series pales in comparison to this. When a little human being enters into this world, it is the bearer of an immortal soul. It is a life that will one day stand before a just and holy God and will receive an eternal destiny. Those of us who are parents are charged to prepare those lives for that moment. It's an unbelievably ironic thing about parenting in our society. Sometimes parents will work real hard to give their kids all kinds of other things. Parents think a lot about what kind of education their kids will have, what kind of lifestyle they'll give to their kids, how they're going to prepare their kids for college or marriage or a job or a number of other things. And oftentimes parents don't help prepare them for the most significant thing any human being in this world will face. It's a fact that we will all face an eternal destiny one day. And if you have kids, how do you help them get ready for that? How do you build faith in your kids? There's a theologian named John Westerhoff. He says, our ultimate goal as parents ought to be to help kids own their faith. Our ultimate goal as parents ought to be to help kids own their faith. I want my children as they grow up to love God and know God and serve God and worship God and give to God, not because I do it, not because they grew up in a church that does it, not because someone expects them to do it, but because that's what they feel at the very core of who they are. I want my kids to be able to own their faith at the core of their being. To get there, Westerhoff talks about several stages that kids generally go through in the process of faith development, and I want to walk through these stages and talk about how we should handle them. Again, this week, if you're a parent, I'd invite you to just grab your bulletin and a pen and take some notes. If you have kids, maybe match up your kids, like see what stage they're at right now and how their development is going. All right, the first stage Westerhoff talks about is the experience stage. This is the faith of early childhood. At this point, children are not able to understand fine points of doctrine, but they often have a sense of openness and sensitivity to experiencing God. This can be quite astounding. Like, one of the biggest mistakes adults make is underestimating a little child's capacity for experiencing God. Sophia Cavaletti is a researcher who has pioneered the study of spirituality in young children. She writes about some remarkable accounts. She finds that children have an amazing perception that far surpasses often what they've already been taught. She writes about a 3-year-old girl who was raised in an atheistic family with no church contact at all, no Bible in the home, and she asked her father one day, "Where did the world come from?" And her dad answered her in strictly naturalistic scientific terms. And in the interest of honesty, he added, "There are some people who say all of this came from a very powerful being, and they call him God." And this little girl started dancing around the room with joy, saying, "I knew what you told me wasn't true. It's him, it's him." Anne Lamott talks about how when she was growing up, her dad was an alcoholic and an atheist, and he made each of his kids make a commitment that they, sometime around like 2 or 3 years old, he made them make this commitment, and the commitment was that they would never believe in God because he didn't believe God existed. And he was real mad at God for not existing. And he was quite bitter about the whole religious deal. And Anne Lamott said that she made that contract with her dad because he was her dad. But she said, "But in my heart, I always knew that when I said hello, someone heard. That when I prayed, there was someone who listened." In the Bible, there are many stories. The story of a young man named Samuel who God speaks to. Stories of children who are just drawn to Jesus like a magnet. I believe this reflects that just as children are born with an innate capacity to develop language, innate ability to learn how to walk, children are born with an innate capacity to relate to God. They're born with the capacity to have experiences with God. They're just wired up that way. And at this experience stage, you want to provide an environment that's rich in opportunities for a child to experience the presence of God. Make sure the Bible is available to them at this stage. There are great resources for kids, illustrated books that tell stories about the characters in the Bible. When our little girls were young, we read the stories from the Beginner's Bible to them every night before they went to bed. We read through that book so many times that our girls had it memorized. We would just start the first line and they would finish the story. Another one of our favorites was the Jesus Storybook Bible. Another thing our kids love is the Bible app for kids. It's an interactive experience with the Bible where the stories just kind of come to life. There's touch animated actions that they can do, to kind of remember as they're learning. It's our responsibility as parents when our kids are small to allow them to have these kinds of experiences and to read to them often and help them to grow up just knowing that the stories of the Bible, hearing these stories about characters in the Bible and how God worked through them. Another thing you can do to help kids experience God is cultivate the habit of praying with them when they're very little. Because prayer often comes more naturally to little children. They're kind of in a simplistic stage of their faith, more than with adults. And I'll just give you some real simple things. Mostly this means teaching your children to talk to God in uncensored ways about just whatever's going on in their lives or whatever's going on in their mind. whatever they're concerned about, whatever they're hoping for, whatever they're afraid of. Just teach them to talk about those things with God. Now you want to gauge the amount of praying you do to their receptivity. Different kids will approach prayer in different ways, and so you want to be watching them all the time and kind of gauge this. I don't always do so well at gauging this. Several years ago, I remember praying with one child before bed, and it was just a real warm, tender moment. And I remember at the end of that prayer just looking into that child and saying, I love you so much. I just love praying with you. And she looked me in the eyes. She said, Daddy, I love you too, with tears welling up in her eyes. And so I went to the other child's room, and I did the same thing. We prayed, and at the end of that prayer, I just said, I love you so much. I just love praying with you. And she looked at me real intently and said, Dad, you've got something sticking out of your nose. I had not gauged that child's level of receptivity very well. Pray with them. Help them to have experiences in prayer. I'll give you another challenge at this point. Make a formal commitment. Maybe you need to make it today if you've never made it before, that you are going to pray for your kids on a regular basis. You know, it's a real striking thing. At the end of the Gospels, Jesus is talking to Peter one time, and he says, Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. And he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He's about to deny Jesus 3 times. And Jesus knows this. Now, if you were Jesus at this point, what would you do? I mean, if I were Jesus and I had all that knowledge and I had all that power, like I would have given Peter one of the biggest lectures of his life. Like I would have given him a lot of advice. I would have given him a very stern warning. Well, Jesus, the Son of God, does none of these things. Do you know what he says to Peter? Look at Luke 22:31. Satan has asked to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Peter, that your faith may not fail. You're headed for the biggest crisis of your life, but I have prayed for you that after you've fallen, God will restore you. See, there's something inside of us that would love to be able to control people, especially our kids, and to fix them. God has willed that no human being can control another human being, and that's a good thing. And it's a real good thing for you that you cannot control your kids, although it's a frustrating thing sometimes. Maybe the single most powerful thing you can do is to pray for them. And I just want to encourage you in this right now. If you've never made a formal commitment, make it today. I will pray for my kids every day. And if you want to write that down, write down their names. I will pray for blank. I will pray for Lily. I will pray for Amron. I will pray for Ezra. Whatever your kids' names are, I will pray for you each and every day for as long as I live. Prayer is a very important part of a child's learning to experience God. Look for chances to talk to God with your kids. You know, if you're out for a hike and you just see like beauty in nature, just stop with your kids and just say, let's just thank God for just how beautiful his creation is. Express gratitude at meal times. Take the opportunity before a competition or a big game. Just kind of pull them aside and you say, let me just pray for you about this game. One of the best questions you can ask your kids is, how can I pray for you? And just let the Holy Spirit guide you in this. God really will partner with you in this parenting deal. Ask him how to help you in leading your kids in this area. Here's something else about providing an environment that's rich in experiences for our kids. If your kids are at the age of roughly elementary age, be real firm in your commitment to have them be a part of Blue Oaks Kids, our children's ministry here at Blue Oaks. This helps us as a church to partner with you to bring the Bible to life for your kids. Get your kids into a consistent pattern of attendance and engagement and involvement in Blue Oaks Kids. This is maybe the greatest help that you'll get in their younger years with this most important parenting assignment that you ever face. One more thing in this area, to anyone here who works in Blue Oaks Kids, so you serve in our kids ministry, if you're a small group leader, if you teach lessons, if you rock babies, if you herd crawlers around, if you plan programs, if you work with or watch or pray over these kids, every single parent in this place owes you a debt of gratitude and honor that is beyond our ability to express or repay. So thank you so much for your investment in our kids. Yeah. All right, the second stage or phase that faith development involves in the lives of human beings is what Westerhoff calls the affiliation stage. This is the stage at which relationships begin to become extremely important in the life of a child. At a certain age, your kids no longer believe that you are the smartest and most powerful person in the universe. And it's a sad day when that comes, but it comes. As kids get older, generally they hit an age maybe like 10, 11, 12, that involves this affiliation stage. And this is characterized most strongly by the desire for a sense of belonging or a sense of connection. It's part of their identity that is being formed. A young person here wants to connect. They want to be a part of something, a group or a community that's bigger than himself or herself. Of course, part of that relational connection becomes a more direct, more mature connection with God and with the community of faith. And when this is absent in their life, that's when cults or gangs or groups that offer pseudo-community begin to look a lot more attractive because there's just a deep need to belong somewhere. Usually when parents whose kids are grown, they look back at their parenting, they wish they would have spent more time teaching their kids about the importance of selecting friends wisely, because the friendship factor is huge. Now, the parent's role in their kid's life is going to look different at the affiliation stage than the experience stage, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing. If you're a parent and you want to help spiritually form your kids, I would say get to know your kids' friends. Make your home as available as you can as a meeting place for your kids and their friends. Now, I'm very aware there is a big hassle factor in this. I remember the first time we had a sleepover at our house. What's the one thing kids never do at a sleepover? Sleep. It's a very ironically named event. But I've known parents where, because of the noise or because of the cleanup hassle afterwards or because of someone might spill on the furniture or whatever reason, rarely they've ever wanted their kids' friends over their house. It's a bad idea. Listen, furniture is not going to last forever, and noise will come and go, but the soul of your child is an eternal thing. And this age, this little group that they're running with is a huge influence. So get to know them and ask them questions. Help your kids think wisely about their relational choices. At this age, your child needs to have some connections, some affiliations with people who are different than him or her. And I would say this is a big need to be a part of a community that serves the under-resourced parts of our world. The teenage years is a great time to take your kids out of what they live here in this part of the world and take them to another part of the world where they're exposed to poverty and the developing world. Our culture will try to turn kids into mall rats at this point in their life, into people that are just obsessed with their own desires. On the other hand, there's often this idealism and willingness and desire to give that can put some adults to shame. So we need to find ways that our kids can get involved in meaningful service. The best way I know is to get your kids involved in our student ministry where they can take these kinds of trips together so they're serving together in community. Again, as parents, this is where we can partner together with our church through our kids ministry, through our student ministries. They provide a lot of opportunities for this. And I just want you to hear from some students in our church who are serving in our community.
I serve at Blue Oaks Church, and I also went to Ecuador, and our family sometimes serves at City Team. And every time I serve, I feel like I'm serving the Lord, and He came to earth to serve us, so I think we should serve Him.
This past year has really allowed me to grow in my faith because every Sunday I spend my time with the middle school students, and I get to see all of them learn about God in ways that honestly I couldn't learn about on my own.
I was poured into when I was young and when I went to church, and so I like pouring into the kids too. And I don't know, it just made me feel more connected to our whole community.
Blue Oaks helped me know that Jesus is always there for me,
he will always guide me, and that most importantly, he loves me.
Well, I choose to serve at Blue Oaks because, first of all, it's really fun. I got to go to Ecuador, and I get to hang out with the kids and make meals for the homeless through City Team. It impacts my faith because when Jesus walked the earth, he was serving. So serving like him is cool.
I choose to serve at Blue Oaks because as a student, I've firsthand seen how an invested leader can really impact your life, and I wanted to be a part of that in someone else's life. And not only do I love spending time with my 7th grade girls, but I've also learned a lot about God's character as I see how he's working in their life and in my life.
I'm a middle school leader with 8th graders, and I really enjoy doing it, spending time in the community with them, and just pouring out into their lives. I know as I was a middle schooler, I had those leaders pouring into my life, so that really changed my life.
It's a really important part of my life to spend time with the church because I find a lot of value and importance by serving in this ministry.
I decided to join the children's ministry because when I was in 5th grade, I noticed how the teachers were so kind and patient with the kids. So in 6th grade, I decided to help out.
Having somewhere to go every Wednesday night where I lead middle schoolers has helped me stay confident and continuous in my own faith as well.
When I'm serving here at Blue Oaks, I'm serving the kids, and each of them have their own cool personality that you can get to know, and it's fun to hang around with them.
During worship, when the kids all get around and worship, it's really sweet to just see how much they love Jesus and how much they love to sing and dance. Yeah, I think it's really important that they've learned the value of coming to church and learning about Jesus, and that we can help them encourage it and make it more fun so they want to come back every Sunday.
Yeah. So get your kids serving in our church and in our community. It's the best thing that they could do for their spiritual development. And I would say it's the best thing that they could do to get to the place where they actually own their own faith. All right, one other aspect in this area, because kids are growing older, they need to hear you speak directly about your spiritual life and about your experience with God. Don't wait on this until you have all the answers. Don't wait until you have your spiritual life in perfect order. This was written by Ken Davis. He writes a lot and he speaks a lot, and he doesn't have a lot of regrets in his life, but this is one of them. I'd love another shot to raise my kids to love and honor God. Too often I avoided overt expressions of faith in my daily life. I was often quite comfortable expressing my faith from the platform, but reluctant to do so in more intimate settings. Many meals in our house went unblessed with prayer. I made several attempts to start family devotions, but they never lasted long. I rarely said the beautiful words, "Praise the Lord," in front of my family. I failed to glorify God verbally in everyday life in front of my children. I wish I could do it over. Parents, talk to your kids about your life with God. Tell them how you came to faith. Tell them your story. Tell them when something makes you grateful for God and his goodness in your life. Tell them sometimes when you've blown it and when you needed to seek forgiveness from God or from someone else. Tell them sometimes when you think God has prompted you to do something and how you did it and how that went. Tell them when you doubt, because you doubt sometimes, and tell them how you handle that. Moses says, talk about God when you rise up, when you lie down, when you're at home, when you're on the road. Tie a string around your finger if you have to. Put a Post-it note on your refrigerator if you have to. Talk to your kids about God. All right, that's the affirmation stage. The third stage that Westerhoff talks about is what he calls the searching stage. And this could be the scariest stage. This is the level that parents most often fear when kids start to question things. When kids become aware of what life is like in this world, and they may ask questions like, if God is such a loving and powerful God, well, how come there's so much suffering in the world? How do I know there really is a God out there? And these are not questions that have easy answers, so don't pretend like they are. They're questions that thoughtful people of faith have wrestled with for a long time now. And a lot of what kids need is simply a safe place where it's okay to talk about and to ask these types of questions. You don't have to have a perfect answer for them. I mean, you could just tell them how it is that you think about these questions. And why is it that even though you wrestle with these questions too, you are able to put your faith in God. And if a resource would be helpful to you, Lee Strobel has written a couple books, The Case for Christ and The Case for Faith, that address many of these types of questions. If it'd be helpful for you to read those books so that you can actually have these kinds of conversations with your kids, I'd encourage you to do that. Both of these books are available and have helped millions of people. They're actually available in student versions as well if you want it in a student version. Sometimes a child gets turned off, or sometimes they get hostile to faith. And this leads to an agonizing question for many parents. Like, what do I do when my child says, I don't want to go to church? I don't want to go to Blue Oaks Kids, or I don't want to go to Blue Oaks students. When they're small, parents, I would say that you need to make the decision for them. Attendance should be a non-optional deal in their early years. But as they get older, say in high school years, this issue will get more complex. And I want to give you two resources or responses to avoid issues when you come to this stage with your kids. Sometimes the kid will say, I don't want to go to church. And the parent will just say, okay, that's fine. And they just let them drop out. I don't think it's a good idea. Because they were made to know God and they were made to be in community. Sometimes the kid will say, I don't want to go to church, and the parents will say, I don't care. You've got to go. And then the child asks parents what a child will always ask, why? And the parent will give the most time-honored answer that parents used, that they swore they would never say to their kids, because I said so. And that's not generally a good idea either. For the most part, healthy, independent, strong-minded kids don't respond to that answer by saying, well, that makes sense. And because you said so, of course, thanks for helping me with that problem. Almost always there's some sense or some reason for their resistance that kind of lies underneath the surface. Almost always at some level, their resistance is kind of a cry for engagement on a parent's part. Of course, part of them would completely deny that. Part of them doesn't want to talk about it with you. Part of them just wants to push you away. But there is part of them that deeply hungers after God because that's part of every human life, although we try to stifle it and sometimes succeed. There is a part of your child that deeply needs and wants you involved in their life and their heart. And that's part of why we have to listen. We have to stick with it, and we need to address those issues. I need to patiently explore with my child, what is going on here? Because maybe they have big doubts, and they just need a safe place to talk about it. We need to be open to that. Maybe their resistance is involved with some patterns of destructive behavior, and they're actually dealing with guilt. When you talk about what's going on in their life, we need to actually help them with that. Often their resistance isn't nearly so much about God, it's actually about their peers. The single most common reason underneath this kind of resistance is, I don't have friends. I go there and I don't know anyone and I just feel awkward and so I don't want to go. Let me say a word about this because this is so common. Developing group friendships is one of the toughest and most important challenges in life. There will always be, anytime there's a group of young people together, a certain level of cliques and barriers and challenges that any given kid will actually have to fight through. That's true at any place, any school, any church. I'm sure it goes on in our church, even though we probably fight against it. I know the leaders of our student ministry know all about this, and they try to work hard that kids can experience community and that it's an inclusive community, and they pray about that. But I know this is just a part of human dynamics. And it may well be that I need to help work through this with my kids. I need to coach them through this. That may require growth on my part. I may not be real good at this kind of thing, but I need to help my kids for right now as they're dealing with it to make a decision. And that decision is you have to keep attending. You have to keep working at developing relationships because this is going to be a big part of your life. I want you to keep working at it. Even though it's a struggle and even though it's hard, it's important for you. And you need to get real creative with this. I know a senior pastor of another church in our community whose kids didn't really connect in the student ministry at his church. And so his kids found another church. It's a great church. It has a large, thriving student ministry. They find it much easier to connect there. Is that an okay thing? Absolutely. I mean, if my kids were in a place where they found another community that was a good Christian community where they can plug in, like, absolutely. It's a good thing. This leads to the last thing that I want to say to parents, and it's the most important thing. Whatever you do or you don't do as a parent, whatever else you work hard at giving to your kids, do not neglect this one. Don't neglect their spiritual lives because too much is at stake. One of the wonderful things about kids is they make us look at our faith in fresh ways. Not only when you're growing as a parent, can you help your kids grow, but they can actually help you grow. Karen Maines, she writes about a Sunday school teacher who was explaining to kids how to get to heaven. And it's a real basic question. She kind of set it up as a Q&A format. She said, if I sold my house, if I sold my car, if I had a big garage sale and gave all the money to the church, would that get me into heaven? And all the kids shouted, no. If I cleaned the church every day, if I mowed the yard, if I kept everything neat and tidy, would that get me into heaven? No. If I was kind to animals and gave candy to children and loved my husband, would that get me into heaven? No. Well, then how can I get to heaven? A 5-year-old shouted, you've got to be dead. Don't miss the obvious there. You've got to be dead. And we don't like to think about this much, but the truth is, you are going to die one day, and so am I. And so will the little children that we love so much, whose entrance into this world fills us with more joy and hope and emotion than just about anything that we face in this life. But someday they will too. And the eternal scheme of things, the day is coming when all who entered into this world will at one point face eternity. Each of my kids, and each of yours too, will hear from a just and holy, loving God about their eternal destiny. And the thought of one of my children missing eternity is just unbearable to me. If you're a parent, I'm telling you, do whatever you need to do. If you need to get your own life squared away with God, get your own life squared away with God, because those little eyes are watching us all the time. And if we're not living what we teach, we're going to mess them up pretty bad. If there are any patterns in your life that need to get squared away, if there's anything that you need to get right between you and God, do whatever you need to do to make it right, because there's too much at stake. Talk to your kids about faith and about their futures and about God. If it's awkward or hard or embarrassing, or if you feel like you don't have the answers, talk to them anyway. You're the parent. And make the commitment that you're going to pray for those little lives every day. We live in a world where parents think so much about parenting and working hard at giving our kids so many good things. There's only one gift that we can give them that will last forever, that will never fade, and that one thing is their spiritual life. It has to do with their eternity. So give them the best that you can. All right, let me pray as the band comes to lead us in a closing song. God, we don't take this responsibility as parents lightly. You've given us this calling to be parents, to raise our children in a way that honors and glorifies you. And so I pray that some of us would rethink that today and this week, that we would recommit to being responsible for the spiritual growth and development of our kids. For some of us, that we would make a commitment that we're going to pray for and lift up our kids to you every day, so that you'll mold and shape their hearts and their minds. And God, I pray that we would get to the point where one day we could look back and say, we did the best we could. And you did the impossible, and you raised our kids to be followers of you. I pray that we all could say that one day. And I ask in Jesus' name, amen.